A big hello to you. It is so great to see you, and I do hope I find you well. I'm Jenny Kirk, welcoming you up here to Weir Yard, and today we're going to be looking at a ready-to-run model of a very unusual prototype. Certainly it's one which I was only very vaguely aware of before Heljan announced that they were bringing the North British 10800 road switcher locomotive to the market. Outwardly, this is actually a really interesting looking model. It seems to bear far more to its design to the North American practice of the road switcher than actually to anything that we're really used to here in the UK. It came from the drawing board of Ivet, hot off the heels of the LMS twins, and I guess the LMS decided after they started work on those that they might need something for handling some of the mixed traffic trains that didn't require a frontline heavy duty diesel locomotive, and thus the North British 10800 was born. Built by the North British Locomotive Company whilst it was ordered in 1945, it didn't actually get delivered until 1950, so never wore LMS livery, unlike the first of the LMS twins. It's a model that Heljan announced a little while ago, and it follows on the heels of some of their other unusual pilot scheme locomotives, including the classes 15 and 16, and certainly both of those owe a lot of their heritage to this North British 10800, certainly the class 16 in particular, and it'll be really interesting to compare this model to that class 16 one from Heljan, as that has been one of my favourite models, in stark contrast to just how successful the 10 of the locomotives were in real life. So today, thanks to Heljan, who've sent a review sample for us to take a good close look at, we're going to be delving into the North British 10800 road switcher locomotive and seeing just what to make of this unusual prototype in ready-to-run form. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCT decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabriek.co.uk. Additional support comes from...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model 00 gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest loco.
Heljan have never been afraid to tackle the more unusual of the locomotives that ran on Britain's railways, and two of those sat here in front of you are the Clayton British Thomas Houston Class 15, and arguably the least successful of all of the mainline locomotives to run in Britain, the North British locomotive Class 16. But these were born out of an earlier prototype that was originally designed by Ivet in 1945 but not delivered until 1950. And this was a kind of follow-on from the LMS twins in the form of a road switcher style locomotive for lighter loads, and that was the North British 10800 class. Heljan has tackled this unusual prototype, and the prototype, albeit in adapted form for further experimentation with brush, lasted right through until 1976, though was not preserved. The locomotive comes in the standard Heljan box, which is nice and heavy duty, and I always say this is something I quite like. It gives a suggestion that the manufacturer is quite proud of the quality of the product they've created. We've got a line drawing on the front, and if I just reach over and grab the Class 16, you can see immediately there's a lot of similarities between the two. And the road switcher layout with the long bonnet at the front and the small bonnet at the back and the cab offset in the middle, is something much more familiar to North American practices. The problem is that with the limited loading gauge in the UK, all it manages to do is give poor visibility in both directions. The model comes with quite a comprehensive booklet in here which gives us the potted history of the prototype, and also we've got some information on getting in for DCC fitting and the exploded diagram, all the parts, and certainly there is a lot that goes into this model. We've also got additional detail parts, and there's some information here on what these are. Inside the box we've got some heavy duty foam which protects really quite well the model inside, and there's our additional detail bag. Although I thought we had some detail parts, oh, we do have some detail parts that seem to have sprung free. I'm not quite sure, that looks like some kind of lifting eye, I'm not sure where that's come from. Let's get the model out. And the livery that this particular version comes in is the BR Early Black with the silver bogies, although the real prototype locomotive very quickly got black painted bogies because, as you can imagine, they proved almost impossible to be able to keep clean. The locomotive does look very much like its North American cousins. It's quite striking actually just how North American this design looks, and I'm guessing that Ivert was very much inspired by the practices that were going on over the Atlantic in terms of modernising the US railroad system. On the front of the model we do seem to have a loose handrail, so I'm just going to carefully put that back in. These are made of wire, so actually quite durable, and just slots back into that hole. Just carefully push it in. And I quite like actually these metal handrails. They are surprisingly robust, and it was one of the detractions of some of the earlier Heljan models, particularly the Class 15, that some of the bonnet handrails and additional detail parts were very easily broken by handling, and that has been addressed in this model. The peculiar front face of this locomotive is captured well. Unlike a lot of other locomotives, this actually doesn't have a radiator grille on the front, and it makes it almost monolithic in the nature of its front look, and this has been captured really well by Heljan. We've got this layout of lighting, and there are a number of different DCC functions that allow the top light to be illuminated separately from the bottom lights and make use of some of the auxiliary functions on the decoder. Looking to the side, we have these radiator grills here, and we've also got the exhauster fan on the roof, and looking down I believe that's where the factory fitted speaker sits, and that again is another great development from Heljan that really does aid those looking to do a factory sound option on their model. Looking to the other side, it's not just a mirror image, we've correctly got some of the different detailing and also this ladder which gave access up onto the roof of the bonnets. There's a lot of separately fitted detail parts, and what immediately strikes me is just how nice this black finish is. Black can be quite a difficult colour to get exactly right, and Heljan have gone for this more of a satin verging on matte finish, and it really does look good. I think gloss would have been too much. The side of the locomotive is quite smooth in places, and this particular paint application does seem to have really made the mark. Now, one of the things that I've noticed on this though is that we've got a little piece of it looks like a glue splatter just on the side there. I think with careful work it would come off, but it's just visible on the side of the cab. Looking along the sole bar, this appears to be metal. It feels very substantial, and certainly there's a lot of weight in this model, and low down weight at that, and I think that part of this is provided by this cast metal running plate. Some of these detail parts are picked out in what looks to be almost a gunmetal finish, and there does appear to be just a little bit of imperfections along the bottom. Turning against the light, it's not so much it's scratched as there appears to be a build-up of paint. It's not really all that noticeable from most viewing angles, so I wouldn't really worry about it, but I'm just pointing it out. I particularly like this North British plate, its distinctive diamond. Under the magnification on the view screen of the camera, I can't quite read it, but it'd be interesting to see just how sharp that is under very close magnification on the computer. It is nicely done, and whilst it's not an etched piece, it doesn't detract for being printed in this way. Underneath, the number and the 3 above are really crisp and sharp, and there's no bleed through the black into the white. And then we've got this additional plate printed underneath. Finally, on the sides of the body here, we have a nice crisp and sharp Cycling Lion British Railways logo. Again, crisp, clean, and really nicely rendered. And that's just like the rest of the cabside detail on both sides. Looking towards the front, again, we've got some actually quite springy, I think they're metal parts. Actually, that is definitely metal, but that feels like it might be plastic. But it certainly does feel quite robust and doesn't seem to have the same issues that some of the earlier Heljan models did, with very fine detail parts that were very easy to knock off and cause to go adrift. We've also got a fully functional prototypical coupling on the front and the back, and this is something again that Heljan do like to go in for. If you do use this kind of coupling, this is fully functional. But if you're looking to add in the optional couplings into the NEM pockets on the bogies, then you will need to do something about this just to stop them from fouling each other. We've also got the vacuum standard fitted as standard, and then we've got these black buffer heads which do feel like they're metal, and there's a little bit of spring to them. They do spring out quite nicely and readily, but again the insides here, they do look a bit odd finished in the black. The buffer beams are red, and this is very much harking back to steam locomotive practice, and actually it provides a very welcome splash of colour on what could otherwise be quite an unusual and drab looking locomotive. I do like these gauges at the front. We've got the needles visible, and again it gives something that draws the eye and is fully in keeping with the prototype. We've got a lot of body side detail down here from the louvres on the radiator vents, and there's a lot of riveting detail too, and that is nice and crisp. Further louvres in these body side doors, there's a lot of them, and it's interesting actually when you compare that to the Class 16. You can see that North British very much carried over some of the design cues from one to the other. One thing though that this locomotive does have is doors at the ends of the cab in the recess. This makes them look very North American, but that might not be something that fully keeps with the UK loading gauge, and I could imagine that getting in and out of these cabs might have been a little bit tricky for the more rotund of employees. The back bonnet correctly captures this riveted on panel. We've also got the lighting on the 4 separate lights. Again, there's different DCC functions that operate these, giving you control over the 3 bottom lights and the top light separately. There's also an interior cab light, and this is something that is always on when running on DC, but is controllable when running on DCC. Looking to the top of the bonnet, we've got, again, all of the detail is replicated that should be here. Some very subtle riveting, and I do like this wire mesh that goes over the fan recess. We've got the roof hatches here, and then the exhaust ports from that 827 brake horsepower Paxman unit. The horn on the front here looks to be a turned metal item. In fact, it feels very, very robust. And again, that's a nice detail to see, given how easily some of the horns are broken on earlier Heljan locomotive offerings. The rear bonnet, again, we've got additional detail on here with the cutouts, louvres at the bottom, and it is really nicely finished. Looking to the underside of the locomotive, the silver finish of these bogies is quite striking. It's something that very early diesel and electric locomotives had on British railways, but it was a livery that quickly fell by the wayside because, as you can imagine, this light colour on the bogies would have become very filthy very quickly and been laborious to clean. You can see, however, though, that it accentuates the primary and secondary suspension, and we've got this fabulous elongated oval cutout where we can see the brake shoes and some of the other detail within. Just comparing this to the Class 16, there's again design cues that have made it through to this model. They're similar but not exactly the same. These are completely tooled from scratch to match what 10800 would have had. Looking to the underside, we've got an assortment of detail here with vacuum brake cylinders, one on each side, a central cylindrical vessel next to them with some nice fine detail on them. The locomotive is all-wheel pickup and all-wheel drive and does seem to have a nice tight transmission. There's no traction tyres, as you would expect, and certainly there's a lot of weight in this model, and I've got every expectation that it's going to perform really, really well. Out of all of the Heljan mainline diesel locomotives that they've produced, the Class 16 is actually my favourite. Despite the shortcomings of the prototype that it's modelled after, it really does perform faultlessly in model form and is an absolute joy to run. That has extended across to the 10800 model, which is definitely something that has a really great presence on the track, and everything about this does look really, really nice and solid as per its Class 16 cousin. One thing though which I have noted is that we do have a little bit of the detail drop which we sometimes have got in the past with Heljan models, and you can see this part here was adrift in the box from where it needed to be down here. Tried putting it back, but it's quite clear that there seems to be a lack of glue having been used, so it's a little bit disappointing that we might just have to do a few running repairs. I've also noticed that these front handrails do seem very prone of popping out of the running plate, and you do have to be just a little bit careful trying to put them back. I found if you use tweezers to manipulate them, it is causing some scrapes and scratches in the black painted finish, exposing the brass wire that they are composed of. In common with many other Heljan locomotives, the couplings aren't fitted out of the box, but do come in an extra package with the other detail parts. And I'm really pleased to note that Heljan have finally got away with those awful cranked couplings, and these are quite easy to fit. Just make sure you've got them the right way up and then insert them with a click into the NEM pockets. One thing you do have to watch out for though, as I said before, is that the coupling that comes factory fitted will interfere with that unless you find a way of securing it out of the way. Paint application on the buffer beams in this red on closer inspection does seem to be a little bit on the thick side, and you can see the way the paint has pooled around some of the detail. Again, it's something that you do have to get quite close to the model to pick up on. We do have the correct pattern wheels with painted black faces, do look really, really nice, and that's a difference from the Class 16 which featured spoked wheels correctly. Running on DC, the model performed as expected, although it was noteworthy that it needed at least 40% on the Gagemaster Model D controller to be able to start running, and this is like Loco on the rolling road. It went up to full speed, and it did feel that this was a prototypical top speed, but it didn't feel as smooth as my Class 16 model from Heljan was, and it will be interesting to see how well this performs when we get it out on the track.
Does your home insurance cover your model railway collection? There can be certain conditions or limitations attached to your policy which could leave your collection uninsured or with very limited cover from all kinds of risks. For example, many home policies only provide very limited cover for contents kept in garages or other outbuildings, and some will only cover for collections up to a limited value. Magnet Insurance are here to help give you that peace of mind, making sure that you don't get caught out. Our specialist policies are flexible, and we can work with you to make sure that your collection is correctly covered and answer any questions that you have. Put your mind at ease by giving us a call on 01636 858 249 or visit our website for a quotation at www.modelrailwayinsurance.co.uk.
A couple of things to note is we do seem to have, as far as I can tell, some imperfections in the paint just down here on the actual running plate. It's difficult to tell, but it just seems to be almost like the model has been sat on something when it was painted, and this has caused a degree of pooling or picking up of some very, very fine particulate matter just along the very bottom edge of the running plate. Another point to note is that this particular review model came missing one of the handrails at the back of the cab. As far as I can tell, there are holes for it to be mounted in, but there's no sign of it in the box. For DCC fitting, I'm going to be using the Trainomatic 21-pin decoder, and to get into the model we're going to need a small crosshead screwdriver and a pair of tweezers. Now this seems to be a little bit more involved than certain other locomotives are, so we're just going to take this quite carefully. First of all, I'm going to use a DCC Concept servicing cradle just to hold the locomotive upside down, and we're looking for a pair of screws. You need to go in almost blind in the gap in the bogie and very carefully just undoing that screw. I'm going to pull it out, put it somewhere safe. There is another one just next to it. Again, you need to go in through the gap just behind the actual brake shoes. I'm just going to pull that one out. At the other end, the screws are in a slightly different position. So if we tilt the bogie to one side, we've got a screw here. And these are a different type of screw by the look of it. So do make sure to note which goes where. And then on the other side we've got another one of these smaller screws, and I'm going to carefully take this out of the cradle, and we're going to need to just very carefully wobble the body free, take the handrails out of the running plate, although it's noteworthy by the fact that these seem to come out quite readily on their own, so you shouldn't have any great difficulty with that. And then the entire body, and it will slide up and off the whole assembly. Looking inside, we do have a reasonable amount of room. What's particularly good is that just up here inside the small end bonnet there is a huge amount of space which can be used if you want to fit something like a Stay Alive or indeed a bigger mega bass style speaker. There is no easy access into the cab interior, so if you're looking to fit a driver figure, that might be just a little bit more involved. It also appears to be the case that the cab floor is again level with the windows, so you might need to do some amputation on your driver figures just to get those in. Inside the model you can see we've got the cab light fitted here, and then the top light and outer two marker lights fitted on this end piece, and the same for this end too. This is the factory fitted speaker, and you'll see a 21-pin socket just here in the center of the model. I'm just going to very carefully rock the blanking plate up at one side and then the other and just get that free. Don't just pull it from one side because you will cause all these pins to bend, and that will really seriously compromise the fitting of your decoder. Line that up, and a gentle pressure is all that is necessary. Make sure that's in place if you want to quickly test this before the body goes back on, and then it's just a case of reassembling. Reassembling the locomotive is just a reverse of what we did before. So first of all, take the body, make sure that nothing is catching, that it all lines up. It is a very tight squeeze over the chassis block. Work that down, make sure you've not got the vacuum pipes jammed in, and there you'll just feel it slide into place, and then it's a case of making sure that all of the handrails get back into their respective holes. Then it's just a case of putting the screws back in, and don't over tighten, they just need a small amount of torque, and then we can program the model on the programming track and take it onto the main layout and see how it performs. Over on the test track, the model did perform really well. First up was the torture test track, and this is a real test of any locomotive. The model performed well on this, taking in all of the twists and turns, and some of these include radius 1 in short stretches, and although the model is recommended for a minimum of radius 2, it actually took in the radius 1 without any issues whatsoever. It also hauled the test train, which not all locomotives can manage on the 5% grades, but there's no hint of slippage whatsoever, and it really did perform well, with a hint that it could manage an awful lot more on these same gradients. I must admit to having been a little bit apprehensive about what the performance would be like, given that it needed 40% power on DC just to start moving. Those fears were gone, because it really was a super smooth performer, even down to a crawl, and there was no need to set up any CVs just to get super smooth running with no cogging, no juddering, and it had a great speed response just out of the box. It was able to haul some quite long trains as well. When I moved it over to the main test track, it really didn't get phased at all by the test train, which included quite a few bogie Mark I coaches along with some Mark I horse boxes, and it was quite clear that the model would be quite happy with an even bigger train too. It had every bit of performance that I'd come to expect from its Class 16 cousin, and certainly with a bit more running in, this model is going to be an absolute superb performer. I must admit that some of my smoothest models are all Heljan in the form of the 05 and 07 shunters, and this model does fit right in with those. It's silky smooth and just gets better and better. The drive is quite tight, and that probably eliminates any hint of slop or cogging, and certainly it was a joy to watch it go round with the full test train, which is probably a lot more than most people would ever deem to tax their locomotive with. It took in all of the point work, the twists, the turns, the gradients, and there was no hint of blustering through double slips or any of the scissor crossings. The back-to-back seemed absolutely fine out of the box, and all in all, I was really impressed with the performance here on Weir Yard. So we turn now to the scores. First up is build quality, and whilst the model does seem to be really quite well put together and internally is impeccable, there were a few areas where it did feel that there were a few issues creeping in. First up are the metal wire handrails. I like the material that they've used, it is incredibly strong, but they have this annoying habit of just pinging out at random. It seems to be almost impossible with handling to keep them in place, so whilst they won't break, they do need to keep being put back, and this needs a pair of tweezers, which seems very prone in taking the black paint off the brass wire that they're made of, and it is a little bit of a shame, but it's a small gripe. The other area where I can point to and say there might be a little bit of an issue is that out of the box, one of the detail parts underneath was loose in the packaging, and this will require gluing to get it back in place. There's also one of the wire handrails by the cab is completely missing. There's no sign of it in the packaging, and I did go hunting, so I can only assume that it left the factory this way. Those are just a couple of small points that mar this otherwise excellent build quality, and I'm going to give it an 8.1. On running quality, out of the box, this model was a pretty good performer. I was a little worried initially on DC running when it seemed to need 40% power just to start running, but the top speed is perfect to the model, and the more I ran it, the smoother it got. Once it was DCC fitted, it took Weir Yard in with ease and actually was an absolutely superb performer. It had a prototypically correct top speed without needing to adjust any of the CVs, and it performed even at low speed crawls really quite well. And whilst the 5-pole motor was a little bit growly at times, it didn't shudder or judder or show any signs of cogging at all, which is really good to see. It ran the torture test track perfectly, and despite weighing slightly less than the Class 16 from the same stable, it did perform absolutely fine with the test train that I threw at it, which is actually heavy enough to phase some locomotives on the 5% grades. It actually even managed to get down to radius 1 at points, but I wouldn't bank the farm on running it on just radius 1, as the instructions do state radius 2 as a recommended minimum. Out on the main track, it handled a really quite long train composed mostly of Mark I coaches with the greatest of ease. There was no sign of slipping even on the gradients, and it really was a firm-footed performer, and I'm going to give it 10 out of 10. On DCC fitting and innovation, well, the DCC fit is surprisingly easy compared to what I thought it was going to be when I looked at the instructions. The body is just a little bit tight on the chassis, but actually not so much so that it can't be got off and on, and it does make it a nice positive fit. All of the electronics inside are really good, and it's nice to see that 5 of the auxiliary functions are pressed into use to give some variety to what head code lights this locomotive can show, plus that cab light. Although the cab light is quite dim, it's a little bit difficult just to see it coming on and off, and there isn't really much of a cab to illuminate. If you want to put a driver figure in, you're going to have to do a bit of surgery to the unfortunate figure just to make it fit, as the floor of the cab is just below window level. Inside the model there is plenty of room. A 21-pin socket sits centrally mounted with more than enough room to take even the largest of 21-pin decoders. With an ESU Locksound V5 recommended for a sound installation, it will also be more than possible to fit a HM7000 decoder if you want to go down the Bluetooth route. There is also a huge amount of empty space underneath the second bonnet behind the cab, and this provides an ideal location if you want to add a power pack or a stay alive, and you really won't be pushed in fitting that and will be able to fit the largest that you choose. The model comes factory fitted with a speaker, regardless of whether it's the factory sound install or not, which makes sound installation really quite easy. The only thing that made getting the body off a little bit tricky is again those wire handrails. They do seem to be the Achilles heel of this model and were really quite tricky to get back into place without damage. So I'm going to give this a 9.2. On accuracy and quality of finish, the model is well researched with plenty of detail where it counts. For a one-off locomotive that ran in very limited form, and indeed for the latter part of its life from the early 1960s through to its demise in 1976, it was in much changed form. This is actually an interesting model which Heljan have to be commended for bringing to the market. I do like these oddballs and one-offs, and certainly with the Class 16 and 15 models that they already have in their range, this tells the full story now from start to end of this interesting design that bears right back to the LMS days and the drawing board of Ivet. There were a few areas where the finish did seem to be a little bit compromised. The die-cast running plate seemed to have a few paint imperfections along the bottom edge, and it was not a huge problem, but certainly one which I did notice. The buffer beams too seem to have had a slightly too generous coat of red paint, and this has caused the paint to just wash out some of the detail. It's not a big deal again, but it is there. And finally, the wire handrails seem very prone to losing their black paint on the many occasions that you have to manipulate them back into place. So I'm going to give this an 8.5. On value for money, it is an expensive locomotive, but it is a one-off as well, and certainly one which I expect Heljan has had to factor in the fact that it would only ever be of limited run potential, and that means that they have to recoup all of the tooling costs in the first run. I'm finding them out there at £179.99 as a discounted price. The price point is fair for what you get, and it is a well decorated and well performing model. So I'm going to give it a 7.9, and that gives us a final score of 43.7. It's a great model of an unusual prototype, which, alongside the more famous LMS twins, is certainly one to provide a great deal of variety to those who model the early BR period. Well, I hope you really enjoyed today's video and found it informative, and we do have an affiliate link down in the description box that takes you to where you can find your own version of this model, plus the other different livery variants that are available. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments section too. Just what did you think about this unusual prototype? Is it one perhaps that you've already got in your collection, or maybe it's something that you've rather liked the look of and thought you might get one yourself? Also, do let me know about anything that you think I may have missed in this review. It's a great way of adding extra information for your fellow modelers to be able to read down in the comments. And please, please, please hit that like button, share the video to social media, and subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so to be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. You can also check out our full merch store, and that's all available down below underneath the video, or you can head on over to Patreon for a number of different tiers of unique rewards that help you support the channel whilst getting something unique and different back as well. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. Happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCT decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabriek.co.uk.
Does your home insurance cover your model railway collection? There can be certain conditions or limitations attached to your policy which could leave your collection uninsured or with very limited cover from all kinds of risks. For example, many home policies only provide very limited cover for contents kept in garages or other outbuildings, and some will only cover for collections up to a limited value. Magnet Insurance are here to help give you that peace of mind, making sure that you don't get caught out. Our specialist policies are flexible, and we can work with you to make sure that your collection is correctly covered and answer any questions that you have. Put your mind at ease by giving us a call on 01636 858 249, or visit our website for a quotation at www.modelrailwayinsurance.co.uk.
Additional support is provided by...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model double-O gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest loco.
I'd like to thank everybody over on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to our Patreon heroes. Without you guys over on Patreon, we really wouldn't be able to keep making the video content that you see on this channel. And don't forget that you can also head on over to patreon.com/Jennifer Kirk and check out the different tiers of rewards. Thank you so much. You are absolute legends.